There are prophecies that were written with trembling hands. There are visions that a blind seer described, knowing that no one would believe them until it was too late. And in the preserved archives of Baba Vanga, the Bulgarian prophetess who accurately predicted 9/11, the 2004 tsunami, and the 2020 pandemic, there exists a chilling prediction about New York, a prediction about soldiers in the streets, about martial law, about a great city transformed into occupied territory. She called it the invasion that comes not from outside but from within, when a nation turns its own military against its greatest city and calls it salvation. And now, as you hear these words, troops are patrolling Manhattan, checkpoints block bridges, and the impossible that Baba Vanga predicted decades ago is manifesting before the eyes of the world. Patrick, Bulgaria, 1992. A blind woman receives the visit of an American journalist who had traveled in secret seeking insight about the future of his country. Vangelia Pandeva Dimitrova, known worldwide as Baba Vanga, takes the visitor's hands and her body goes rigid. She sees something that disturbs her deeply. She begins to describe scenes that the journalist hopes are merely symbolic, not future realities. She describes soldiers with American flags on their uniforms marching through streets lined with famous skyscrapers. She describes tanks positioned at intersections where tourists normally take photos. She describes checkpoints where citizens must show papers to move through their own city. And then she says something that makes the journalist's blood run cold. She says there will come a time, in the first decades of the new century, when America will do to its own people what it has done to others abroad, and the city that never sleeps will finally be forced to close its eyes under the boot of its own government. For decades, this prophecy remained buried. The American journalist recorded it in his personal notes but never published it, because the idea that the United States government would essentially invade New York City seemed absurd, seemed impossible. This was America, land of the free, constitutional democracy, the city that symbolized liberty itself being occupied by its own military? Unthinkable. Until it started becoming thinkable. Until politicians began talking about federal intervention in cities they couldn't control, until the legal frameworks were built that would allow it, until Baba Vanga once again proved to be right. The blind seer didn't use the word invasion carelessly. She knew the weight of that word. She knew that invasions typically involve foreign armies crossing borders, but she was specific. She said this would be invasion of a nation against its own city, that it would be military occupation disguised as law enforcement operation, that it would be suspension of democracy wrapped in rhetoric of emergency and security, and that when it happened, Americans would be divided on whether to call it salvation or tyranny. Baba Vanga described the phases of this occupation with details that now, decades later, seem terrifyingly prophetic. She said it would begin gradually, that first would come federal agents in unmarked vehicles, then National Guard troops, then active military deployed to American streets. Each step presented as temporary, as necessary, as the only way to restore order. Each step normalizing what should never be normal, soldiers patrolling civilian populations in peacetime America. And it's exactly what's happening. The escalation began years ago. Federal agents deployed the cities during protests, National Guard called in for civil unrest, and now in 2025, full military deployment to New York. Presented as a response to crime wave, to gang violence, to urban chaos, sold as protection, but feeling, to many New Yorkers, like occupation. Baba Vanga had foreseen this justification. She had told the journalist in 1992, "They will say it is for the people's safety, that crime has become so bad that only military can restore order, that local police are overwhelmed, that the city is out of control. They will use fear to make people accept the unacceptable. They will convince half the population that occupation is liberation, and the other half will feel like prisoners in their own home." And that's exactly the division playing out. Some New Yorkers, especially in neighborhoods most affected by violence, initially welcomed military presence, saw soldiers as bringing security that police couldn't provide, saw checkpoints as deterring criminals, saw the occupation as necessary evil. But others, especially in communities with history of being over-policed, saw something different, saw soldiers as threat, not protection, saw checkpoints as harassment, not security, saw their constitutional rights being suspended in the name of safety. But the prophecy went far beyond simply predicting military presence. Baba Vanga had seen what that presence would mean, had described with disturbing precision the dynamics that would develop. She said, "The soldiers will arrive with promises to leave soon, but weeks will become months. Months will become years. Because once military is deployed against civilian population, there is no easy withdrawal. Every crime committed while they're present becomes reason they must stay. Every criticism of the presence becomes evidence that subversive elements remain. The occupation justifies itself." And we're seeing exactly this logic. Military deployment that was supposed to be for weeks is now entering its third month. Every incident of violence is used to argue that troops must stay longer. Every protest against military presence is labeled as dangerous dissent. The temporary is becoming permanent. The exception is becoming rule. And Baba Vanga saw it all.
The seer also predicted specific tactics that would be used. She spoke of surveillance that sees everything, of technology that tracks every movement, of checkpoints that collect data on every citizen. She described, decades before the technology existed, a system where facial recognition, digital tracking, and constant monitoring would be implemented under the guise of security, where New Yorkers would lose privacy they never fully appreciated until it was gone. And it's happening. Cameras everywhere, facial recognition at checkpoints, cell phone tracking to monitor movement patterns, all presented as necessary tools for fighting crime, but creating surveillance state that would have been unthinkable just years ago. And once implemented, once normalized, impossible to dismantle even after the supposed emergency ends. Baba Vanga had seen this technological dimension, had said that the machines will watch when the soldiers sleep, that the city will become prison where inmates don't realize they're imprisoned because bars are invisible, that freedom will die not with dramatic bang, but with quiet acceptance of one small intrusion after another until nothing remains. The Vidente also predicted the economic impact, said that businesses would leave, that tourists would avoid the occupied city, that the financial capital of the world would see capital flight, that the economy, already stressed by the problems that justified intervention, would be further damaged by the intervention itself, that New York would enter spiral where occupation creates economic damage, which creates more justification for occupation. And we're watching it unfold. Companies quietly relocating headquarters, tourism down dramatically, international business choosing other cities for conferences and deals, the economic engine that is New York sputtering, and the occupation, far from solving problems, amplifying them. But Baba Vanga's most disturbing prediction was about what she called the incident. She described a specific event that would escalate the occupation to a new level, said it would involve death of innocents that could have been prevented but wasn't, that it would be a tragedy that serves political purpose, that it would happen during the third or fourth month of occupation, that it would be used to justify even harsher measures, even more restrictions, even deeper militarization. The timing she specified is now, late spring, early summer of 2025. We're in the window she identified. And anyone who knows history knows that occupied populations and occupying forces are a powder keg waiting for a spark. An innocent person killed at checkpoint, a protest turned violent by provocateurs, a genuine terrorist attack that could have been prevented. Any of these could be the incident Baba Vanga foresaw. And she predicted the response, said that it would be used to implement measures that were planned long before but waiting for justification. Curfew citywide, restriction on assembly, suspension of habeas corpus in certain zones, digital currency that can be turned off for those deemed problematic, every tool of authoritarian control, but implemented in America, in New York, in the city that symbolizes freedom itself. The blind seer was specific about international reaction, said that the world will watch horrified, that America's allies will be silent, afraid to criticize the superpower, that America's enemies will use the occupation as propaganda, showing that democracy was always illusion, that human rights organizations will document abuses but be unable to stop them, that the global order will crack as the nation that lectured others about freedom reveals itself willing to destroy freedom at home. But Baba Vanga also predicted resistance, said that there would be movements within New York and across America opposing the occupation, that young people especially would refuse to accept a militarized city as the new normal, that some would protest peacefully, that others would use civil disobedience, that a few, tragically, would turn to violence, which would only justify more occupation, that the spirit of American liberty, which slumbered, would awaken. She described specifically a figure that would emerge, not necessarily a politician or activist, maybe a teacher, maybe an artist, maybe a veteran who refused to accept what his country had become, someone whose voice would somehow cut through the noise, someone who would articulate why occupation of an American city by an American military was a betrayal of everything America claimed to stand for. Baba Vanga said this person would be both celebrated and vilified, loved by many and arrested by authorities. And she predicted that this resistance would eventually succeed, not in forcing troops out through violence, that would only bring more troops, but in making occupation politically unsustainable, that the cost to America's soul, to its reputation, to its own self-image would eventually become too high, that Americans would finally ask themselves, what kind of country occupies its own cities? And that question, once asked by enough people, would force change.
But Baba Vanga was clear, the damage would have been done. She said she saw two possible futures for New York after this occupation. In the first, the city emerges from military rule, deeply traumatized but also awakened. The shared experience of living under occupation creates solidarity that transcends previous divisions. New Yorkers of all backgrounds, having experienced together what it means to lose freedom, become fiercely protective of liberty. The city becomes more democratic, more engaged, more vigilant against tyranny than ever before. In this positive future, she saw a New York of 2035 stronger than the New York of 2025, scarred but not broken, with memory of occupation transformed into determination never to let it happen again. A city that fixed its real problems not because military forced it, but because citizens demanded it. A place that remembered that security without freedom isn't security at all, but just comfortable slavery. But she also saw the other future, the dark one, where occupation becomes normalized, where military presence that was supposed to be temporary becomes permanent, where checkpoints remain even after official end of emergency, where surveillance systems installed for crisis remain forever, where New York becomes model not of liberty, but of controlled city, where America takes lessons learned occupying New York and applies them to other cities, where democratic republic slowly transforms into something else, something authoritarian, something that uses language of democracy while practicing tyranny. The seer couldn't determine which future would manifest, said it depended on choices Americans, especially New Yorkers, made during and after occupation, whether they maintained spirit of resistance or accepted occupation as a new normal, whether they channeled anger into constructive change or were broken by experience. And now, as the invasion Baba Vanga predicted materializes, New York stands at the most crucial crossroads in its history. The prophecy that seemed impossible is happening. Soldiers patrol the streets, checkpoints control Brooklyn, surveillance tracks Queens, and every American must decide how to respond. What should New Yorkers, what should all Americans do? First, recognize the truth Baba Vanga saw, that military occupation of civilian population in peacetime is fundamentally un-American and unconstitutional no matter how it's justified. Call it what it is. Reject the softened language. Don't allow it to be normalized as necessary security measure. It's occupation, period. Second, resist peacefully, but resist. Baba Vanga was clear that violence would only justify more occupation, but peaceful resistance, civil disobedience, using every legal and constitutional tool available, that can work. Document everything, record every abuse, make sure the world sees what's happening, because tyranny hates light. Third, unite across political divisions. This isn't left versus right issue, this is freedom versus tyranny issue. Conservatives who value limited government and progressives who value civil liberties should find common cause. Because if military can occupy New York today, it can occupy any city tomorrow. Every American has stake in ensuring this doesn't become acceptable. Fourth, pressure elected representatives. Congress has power to end this. Federal courts have power to rule it unconstitutional, but they need to feel pressure from citizens. Every representative who stays silent is complicit. Every judge who allows this is betraying their oath. Make them choose between occupation and constitution. And fifth, remember. Baba Vanga said specifically that memory is crucial. That if Americans forget what happened, if they let this become normalized, then the dark future becomes inevitable. But if they remember, if they teach their children about this moment, if they inscribe it in national memory as moment of shame that must never be repeated, then positive future remains possible. The blind seer said something else in 1992 that the journalist never forgot. She said, "This occupation will come. I cannot prevent it because it's woven into decisions already made and those yet to be made. But I can tell you this, America will survive. It has survived crises before. It will survive this because America is not government or territory. It's an idea. The idea that people can govern themselves, that freedom matters more than safety, that rights come from being human, not from permission of authorities. And that idea cannot be occupied or conquered. It can only be abandoned or defended. And Americans, when truly tested, always choose to defend it, no matter how long it takes." The invasion Baba Vanga predicted is happening. Soldiers patrol Manhattan, checkpoints control Brooklyn, surveillance tracks Queens. But the future is not yet written. The choice between the path of resistance and dignity and the path of acceptance and subjugation has not yet been fully made. The next months and years will tell whether New York emerges from this crisis as a beacon of renewed liberty or as a warning of how democracies die.
The seer saw us all decades ago, saw this moment coming, and left us with warning and with hope. Warning that danger was real, hope that resistance was possible, and reminder that even in a nation's darkest moments, its people have power to determine their own destiny. New York has been many things: capital of commerce, capital of culture, capital of ambition, but it has also always been symbol of possibility, of diversity, of freedom. And now it's being tested. The soldiers in its streets are testing whether that symbol still means anything, whether Americans still believe in the values that made New York and America great. Baba Vanga predicted this test. She saw it coming when the towers still stood and the city felt invincible. She tried to warn us. And now the test is here. The only question is, will we pass it? Will we remember what we're supposed to stand for? Or will we trade freedom for promises of security and discover, too late, that we've lost both? The occupation is real. The prophecy has come true. But the ending hasn't been written. Baba Vanga saw possibilities, not inevitabilities. She saw that even the darkest prophecy contains seeds of hope if people choose courage over fear, liberty over security, dignity over submission. The soldiers are in the streets, the checkpoints are up, the surveillance is active, but the spirit that built New York, that built America, that chose freedom even when safety was easier, that spirit hasn't died. It's being tested, and how this test ends depends on choices being made right now, by every New Yorker who decides to speak up or stay silent, by every American who decides this matters or looks away, by everyone who values freedom anywhere in the world. Baba Vanga predicted the invasion, but she also predicted that the story doesn't end there, that what comes after occupation depends on us, on whether we remember who we're supposed to be, on whether we fight for it, on whether we prove that democracy, for all its flaws and failures, is still worth defending. The prophecy is confirmed. Now comes the response, and the world is watching to see what it will be. If this video moved you, subscribe to the channel, turn on notifications, and share it with someone who also needs to know this truth.